I'm from Vancouver Island. I grew up camping, hiking, swimming, and out in nature. There's a smaller island off the coast of Victoria that I used to go camping on quite frequently. It's a beautiful campsite right on the ocean with trails that lead through the forest to a beautiful smaller cove. Though I love camping at the spot, I had some weird encounters there. There are even weird stories about the island itself. Some say that the island is like a vortex. When you go there, it's as if time moves differently. You plan to only go for a few days, but then you find yourself still there a week later, feeling lethargic and drunk like, with no desire to leave. I always just chalked this up to hippie nonsense, as I called it. The first strange encounter I had was when I was camping there with a few friends when I was a teenager. I'm 28 now. It was twilight and we decided to go bushwhacking through the forest behind the campsite. We were laughing, talking, and joking around, finding cool rocks and feathers, and generally having a good time. We were getting deeper into the woods and it was getting darker. Then, in the middle of our conversation, we all stopped at the same time, dead in our tracks. There was this awful feeling out of nowhere. We all looked at each other and we all felt the same thing. Without saying a word, we turned around and ran until we could see the ocean through the trees. Talking to my friends about it afterwards, we all described the same thing. It's as if out of nowhere there was this palpable, heavy, dark feeling, as if we were being watched. As if we had stepped into some territory that we did not belong in. My most rational friend said maybe there was a predator near, though no bears or cougars reside on that island. The biggest animals you ever find there are deer. I wasn't convinced. The second encounter came about a year later. My friends and I were camping for a couple nights, and one evening I'd gone for a run along a trail that follows the water's edge to a small cove. It was a beautiful, crisp evening. I had climbed down some steep rocks and was sitting by the ocean to take a breather. I was just taking in all the beautiful scenery of the Pacific Northwest when I heard a noise from the woods behind me and instantly got a feeling of dread, like I was being watched. "Hello?" I said, thinking it might have just been another hiker. But no one responded. I tried to talk myself down and look back out over the ocean, but that feeling of being watched got worse until it sent shivers down my spine. I climbed back up the rocks, hyper-vigilant, still trying to tell myself it was nothing. I looked around the woods, but couldn't see anything. All of a sudden, I felt breath on the back of my neck. I turned, terrified, but nothing was there. I ran faster than I knew was possible all the way back to the campsite. That night, I had a dream that an old wizened woman who looked similar to an evil witch from a fairy tale was trying to drag me out of my tent by my feet. I kept kicking and screaming until eventually she stopped. When I woke up in the morning, the zipper on my tent was wide open. There was no way I would have forgotten to close it. I asked my friends if they had opened the zipper of my tent in the night, and they just looked at me like I was crazy. It was too weird. But it's amazing how time can make you forget. I chalked that experience up to a rational fear and a bad dream. So the next summer when I went camping there again, I went down that same path by myself to the small cove, thinking nothing of it. At some point, I started climbing along the rocks for fun when I found a dead raccoon. It was on its back on a flattish rock. Its belly had been flayed open, not by an animal, but with a knife, as it had clean, almost surgical cuts into its skin, and its innards had been cleaned out expertly, so that its abdominal and chest cavity were empty, like a carved pumpkin. I got chills and was trying to rationalize why someone would do this. After that, I didn't go camping there for almost 6 years, but again, it's amazing how time makes you forget. A couple of years ago, I was camping there with my boyfriend. It was a beautiful summer evening and we were sitting by the ocean. The sun was starting to set when all of a sudden we saw bioluminescence on the rocky shoreline. I was so excited I wanted to get closer to see. It was a steep climb down to the ocean and the rocks were slippery. My boyfriend said I shouldn't go, but I insisted. I felt this call that I had to go down there. It was overwhelming. Once I got down there, I was transfixed by the bioluminescence. I should say that I've always loved the water. I'll go swimming spring, summer, fall, or winter. I just feel this call from rivers, lakes, or oceans, like a soul call. My boyfriend jokes that I should be careful, that the water wants to take me back, as he says, and I laugh. But that evening, as I was staring at the bioluminescence at the water's edge, he wasn't joking. He was yelling at me to be careful and get away from there and come back up. He was clearly distressed, so I climbed back up to where he was. I was confused because it wasn't stormy or anything. He said he just had a bad feeling. We got talking about other things. It was almost night though, and there was a faint light on the horizon and light from the rising moon. All of a sudden, we saw this head bobbing in and out of the waves. It was moving so fast. I've never seen anything move like it. I knew the marine life of that area well, and my mind was running through all the creatures, trying to figure out what it was. Too big for an otter, not the head shape of a seal or a sea lion, not a porpoise, and none of those creatures can move like that. It was as if time was speeding up and slowing down as it moved. Then it rolled onto its side and floated on the surface of the water. It was big as a sea lion, but slender. Its skin was scaly and it shimmered blue, purple, and green in the moonlight. Its head and upper body was almost human-like, but I couldn't make out specific features in the darkness. Its body was rippling as if it was part of the waves themselves. It stayed there staring at us for a few minutes, then it disappeared. We were flabbergasted, to say the least. We both knew we saw something paranormal, but what? A mermaid maybe? A sea fairy? I'm not sure, but I do take extra caution when I swim now, and I never swim out in the deep. There's a bog near my home in Kentucky. It's accessible to anyone because there's a popular paved bike/walking trail that runs past it. However, there are also several foot trails through the woods that also lead to the far side of the bog, which has a reputation for being haunted. I was walking through the trails one day, I think I was about 14 at the time, when I started to hear talking. I could hear conversation from strange, gurgling voices that seemed to be close to me, just beyond my reach, and also very far away from me, all at the same time. I stopped to listen, but couldn't catch any words in English, even though I could clearly hear the voices fading in and out. I decided to follow the voices to see who was speaking, because it was very odd to meet people on these trails. Maybe the occasional hunter on a four-wheeler, but I had heard no engines. I followed the voices out of the woods towards the bog. As I reached the bog, the voices hushed up a bit, but didn't stop. I looked around and could see clear across the muddy waters. There was no one on the paved trail as far down the path as I was able to see. No one on any side of the bog. I looked out over the water, listening to the voices fade and twist and change, like They were coming to me on the wind. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. I looked over and saw something hovering above the water. It was the strangest thing I've ever seen. This weird, muddy blob of a thing with eyes that looked straight through me. I stared at it for a long time. It was a blob of mud, there's no other way to describe it, with small spiny hands and tiny shining black eyes. Then suddenly it fell away into the water with a huge splash. At the same exact time, about 4 or 5 splashes just like the one I just heard happened across the entire bog. I had no idea what I had just seen or what to think. Ever since then, I feel strange every time I go to the bog. I still hear voices from time to time and splashes, even though the water is stagnant and has no fish. I now believe what I saw was some kind of water fairy. Maybe many water fairies live in that bog. I think they're elemental beings that exist on a different plane of existence and sometimes cross over into our own. And for whatever reason, I was able to see them that day. The Avanc is a Welsh water fairy, not as well known as the Kelpie of Scotland, but one people should know about. Unlike the Kelpie, the Avanc are shapeshifters and able to change form at will, which is why there are so many contradictory tales of their appearance. Many years ago, I think I saw a real one. At the time, me and my mom would go to a place we called Chipmunk Park due to all the chipmunks there. It was a nice park around a pond at the base of the Alpine Mountains of the western U.S. It was a very normal day. The sun was bright, no clouds or rain. I think it was late spring, if I remember right. There was a pond that was fed by a small stream of water from the melting snow and ice of the mountains. People often fish there. And there was a tiny island with a few pine and aspen trees on it out in the middle of the pond. That day, I recall there was an odd feeling to the world, but I didn't know why at the time. When we got to the pond, it was early afternoon and the sun was casting soft golden light that reflected off the pond. I was watching the glittering light when I noticed something moving in the water. "What's that?" I asked. My mom shushed me and whispered to be quiet and watch. I did, and at first I had a hard time understanding what I was seeing. Something was shifting, moving in and out of the water, like a fish or a person swimming, and yet there was no solid form there. It was like whatever it was made entirely out of water. Then suddenly it lifted itself up. It was like a sudden tall wave that had taken shape. Its form was tall and thin, with gangly legs, I guess. It was hard to tell what they were. It had a short, compact body at the top that reminded me a bit of a turtle, but there was also another limb I couldn't identify. To me, it looked a bit like an elephant's trunk, but for all I know, it could have been a tail. My mom, who knew about fairies, told me it was an Avanc, and that we should keep our distance because they could be very temperamental and didn't like intruders. I kept watching it. It seemed to be looking around. For what? I have no idea. Maybe just patrolling its territory? Then we heard a splash from the far end of the pond. We glanced over and saw 2 boys laughing and throwing rocks into the water. The Avanc noticed them too and started to move very fast in their direction. I knew the boys couldn't see it because they didn't react at all to this thing racing towards them. Seeing the boys were in danger, my mom panicked. She grabbed up a small flat stone and hurled it at the pond. "Hey, over here!" she yelled as the stone skipped along the water and hit the Avanc. Oh, the sound it made! It was like nails on a blackboard, along with breaking glass and screeching tires. The Avanc suddenly turned towards us. My mom grabbed my hand, and we ran as the water of the pond splashed behind us like an ocean wave breaking on the shore. We didn't look back. By the time we got to the car, we were out of breath, but my mom was laughing. I was too, as the whole situation seemed silly for some reason, despite the danger we had been in. My mom later told me more about the Avanc, how they're mostly mischievous, but can be genuinely dangerous if angered or provoked. They mostly inhabit lakes or ponds and like to make noises to scare humans. They are territorial, but if you leave a small gift for them, they more than often will leave you alone. She said they like sweets the most, but also, like many fairies, like copper. And this is part of where the custom of dropping copper coins into ponds or fountains for good luck or wishes come from. But she said this particular Avanc seemed bad-tempered and that we should avoid it, offerings or not. And so I did. I haven't been back to that pond since, but I'll never forget the experience. One beautiful summer day, I decided to stop at a river not far from where I lived in Lancashire, England. There's a short stone wall by the river and lots of mossy rocks and trees, giving the area a magical feel. I sat down on the edge of the wall, took off my shoes, and dangled my feet in the river, enjoying the sensation of water between my toes and the sun on my face. I was feeling warm and peaceful and very relaxed, when I suddenly noticed right in front of me, by the river rocks, a small group of what appeared to be water fairies, having a water fight and giggling to themselves. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. They were these miniature beings, almost out of a drawing. Their upper bodies and heads were human-like, while their lower bodies were like those of small fish. And they had wings fluttering from their backs, like dragonflies. They seemed joyful, if a little bit mischievous, and didn't appear to notice me. I'm not sure how long I watched them for, probably only a few seconds, though in the moment I felt like I had lost all sense of time. Then they just vanished. I was extremely happy afterwards, and the feeling lasted for the rest of the day. I'm not sure why I was gifted with such an experience, but I'm grateful. This world is stranger and more magical than we know. This happened in 1987 in a rural Amazonian community in the region of San Martin, located in northern Peru. I was 7 years old at the time. Back then, every day about 3 p.m., I would accompany my mom to her farming grounds within the dense vegetation of the rainforest to feed our animals. We had ducks, chickens, turkeys, and hogs. Every day while my mom worked, I would play, climb trees, pick their fruits, and explore. One day, I wandered off through the jungle on a path I had taken multiple times. I was walking by a small river when I saw a beautiful, naked woman sitting on a rock in the middle of the river, brushing long blonde hair. There was something non-human about her. I immediately hid. I didn't want her to see me for fear of being kidnapped. I think she was singing to herself. Then suddenly she turned around and looked in my direction. It was like she could sense that I was there. At this point, I think she either jumped in the river or disappeared while I blinked, because when I opened my eyes again, she was gone. In around 2010, my husband and I went for a day trip to a park in North Carolina. There's a river that runs through the park that my husband likes to fish at, and though I'm not big on fishing, I enjoy nature and the outdoors. That day, while my husband fished, I found a big flat rock in the river to sit on, and took out a book and started to read, enjoying the sunshine and the sounds of the water. Across from me, there were people here and there out for walks with their kids or dogs. I noticed two young boys walking down the trail not far from me with their dad. As they neared the river, I saw something moving through the water towards them. Some kind of human-like creature. It was pale-skinned, waterlogged looking, with black hair and sharp serrated teeth that seemed to be stretched in almost a smile. It went right by me, paying me no attention, seemingly focused on the boys. The boys looked right at it and began pointing at it with sticks. They could absolutely see it, but their dad didn't seem to be able to. He casually ushered the boys away from the edge of the water, seemingly unaware of this thing only feet away. The creature watched the boys move up the trail for a few seconds, and then moved on up the river, out of sight. I had no idea what I had just seen, but it did not look friendly to me. My granny from Ireland says I have the sight like she does, and I know sometimes young children can see things that adults can't. That might be why I saw the creature, as did the boys, but their father did not. I think beings from another world sometimes share our world with us and can have good or bad intentions. I think what I saw was one of those beings. I was always taught never to talk to them or let them know I can see them. My grandpa always told me to be careful around water. I always thought he was a worrywart. Back when I was a little boy, we lived in the mountains near a lake, and there were many rivers nearby. I would go exploring and playing, but Grandpa always told me never to go near the rivers or lakes alone. When I would ask why, he would just say it was dangerous. As many children do, I didn't believe him. I thought he was just being an old grump and making rules just to make me miserable. One day when I was out exploring, I came upon a small lake. It was very pretty, and the surface looked like silver, perfectly reflecting the trees and mountains. The day I found it, it was dark with stormy clouds in the distance. Now and again I could hear thunder. I noticed that most of the trees here were willows, birches, and such. Funny, since this was an alpine forest. But as a child, I never paid that oddity any mind. The lake was so still, it looked like a perfect mirror. Not a single ripple could be seen on it. It could well have been a real mirror of silver for all I knew. I heard my grandpa calling my name and reluctantly left the pretty lake. But as I left, I thought I saw something moving. I couldn't be sure, but I turned and left regardless. I didn't tell my grandpa about the lake, as I knew he would tell me to stay away from it, to be careful, blah, blah, blah. I came back to the lake a few days later, and this time there was a bit of rain. Just a few drops, so I could stay out longer. When I came to the lake, it looked as calm and peaceful as before, but it seemed a bit warmer than it should have been. There were also no ripples on the lake, even from the few drops of rain that were falling. There was something enchanting, entrancing about it. I came forward, knelt at the edge, and touched my fingers to the water. For the first time, ripples appeared, gently flowing and distorting the surface of the water. There was something hypnotic about how they moved, distorting the reflections of the mountains, the trees, and the clouds. It made me feel happy. I don't know why. I smiled, almost sleepy, as if I could nod off at any second. I was broken out of my trance by my grandpa shouting my name. I looked around and was surprised to find the sun was setting. I got up and had the odd feeling that I was being watched. I looked around but saw no one, not even an animal. Even so, I still had the feeling of eyes watching me as I left the pretty lake. That night after supper, I sat with my grandpa by the fire in our cabin and asked why he said it was dangerous to go near water. I expected him to talk about slipping, drowning, and such, but what he said surprised me. There are things that like to be near water, bad things, dangerous things, things that do not like humans. Many accidents by the water are anything but. People will deny it, but it's true. So listen when I say the water is dangerous. I didn't really know what he meant at the time. I mostly thought it was Grandpa being his odd self. I didn't really take it as a genuine warning. I visited the lake a week later. It was raining softly again, and the mountains were cloaked in clouds and rain. I'd brought a fishing pole, my grandpa's in fact. I wanted to see if I could catch a fish out of the lake. When I got there, the mist and clouds were laying on the tops of the trees, but I still could see the lake perfectly. It was as beautiful as ever, perfect, reflective, unchanging. I baited my hook and cast the line out. The ripples enchanted me, and I sat and watched them. For how long, I do not know. Eventually, I heard a soft sound coming from along the shoreline. I looked over and saw this beautiful white horse standing on the shore nearby, looking at me. It had a mane so long it reached to its hooves, which were also furry. It was perfect. White, like what I imagine a unicorn to look like, but without the horn. It looked at me with beautiful big brown eyes, nickering softly. I stared for the longest time at it, the most beautiful horse I had ever seen. It moved its head and seemed to motion to me. I felt this compulsion to get closer to it, to touch it. I stood up and started walking towards it. As I walked, my heart fluttered and I felt happy. I wanted to pet it and ride it and put my arms around its neck. It was so beautiful and looked so soft and smooth. It looked at me, and for one instant, its eyes locked with mine and seemed to flash. I reached my hand out, about to touch its muzzle, when, again, I heard my grandpa call my name. I jerked back as if waking up from a dream. I shook my head. I felt as if there was a fog over my eyes that was slowly lifting. When I looked around finally, the horse was gone. Had I dreamed it? Had I fallen asleep? I hurried to grab up my fishing rod and then left. As I walked away, I glanced back and thought I saw the horse on the far side of the lake. From where I was, it almost looked like it was standing on the water. Probably standing in the shallows on the other side. I turned and hurried back to the cabin to find my grandpa, knowing he would be angry if I didn't answer. That night I told my grandpa about what had happened. That's when he told me about the KELPIE, the water horse, one of the most dangerous of all the Fae. He said kelpies took the guise of horses in order to lure people onto their backs for a ride. Once on its back, a human would be stuck there, and then the Kelpie would drown and eat them. Thinking back on the lake and the horse and how perfect everything was, there was definitely something otherworldly going on. I soon became convinced that what I saw was indeed a Kelpie, and that I had narrowly escaped a very terrible fate. That was a long time ago now. I'm grown up and I have my own family. My grandpa may be gone now, but his wisdom still lives in me. Now I tell my kids the same stories that Grandpa told me. I tell them of the Kelpie and how I was almost one of its victims. And I never let them go anywhere near the water alone. Thanks for watching. As always, special thanks goes out to all my supporters on Patreon. Thank you guys so much for all the support you are giving this work. It's really encouraging for me to keep doing the work that I do. If you like this content and would like to support it, please check out my Patreon page. The link is in the description. Even $1 is really very much appreciated, so thank you so much. The stories in this video came courtesy of subscribers and the Fairy Census. Thanks to everyone who submitted. Some of these stories from the census were edited just to make them more friendly for narration, but if you want to read the originals, the link to the census is in the description. Let me know if you have any suggestions or requests for future videos down in the comments. Any kind of fairy stories that you would like to hear, any topics that you want me to cover in the future, and any questions that you have about fairies in general. I'm going to be in the comments for the next hour or so answering questions that you guys might have. I'm always collecting your true fairy encounter stories, so if you've got one, I'd love to hear it. My email is in the description. That goes double for fairy art. If you have any to share, please email it to me with fairy art in the subject line, and I will post your fairy art on my social media channels. Don't forget to comment below, like, share, and subscribe if you're new, and definitely hit the bell to receive notifications of new videos. And until next time, this has been a visit from your scary fairy godmother.